My maid and I buried the two adventurers under a big tree. On the way out of the Belen plain, I noticed that the maid had something on her mind. The maid told me her doubts, and I also shared my thoughts on them with her. But when I got home, I found that I had been locked up in the basement by the maid again. In addition, she walked into the room wearing a very charming outfit. What's going on here? It's already morning now. The sun has risen into the sky and will dispel the darkness with bright sunshine. The dark clouds had already followed the night and left here, revealing the azure sky. The sunshine shines on the emerald green Belen plain, making it look more vibrant and livelier. A gentle breeze blew, and some mischievous grasses and leaves followed the footsteps of the wind to farther places. Not far away, several small birds passed by the Belen plain and curiously observed the people on the ground. Under a big tree not far away, Moen and Anne are digging a big hole. Then, they put Aluka and Rod into the big pit and buried their bodies with more soil. Aluka and Rod both had calm expressions, as if they were just peacefully asleep. The sound of the shovel digging into the earth also seemed to be bidding them farewell. And used her magical energy to shape two silver shovels. She handed a shovel to Moen to make it easier for him to dig. After covering Aluka with most of the soil, and turned to Moen and spoke to him. "Young master, I'm fine now." After noticing that Anne had completed her work, Moen hurriedly spoke to her while accelerating the speed of digging the soil. "So fast. Wait a moment. I'll be ready soon." After burying Aluka and Rod, Moen found a small wooden board nearby and wrote Aluka and Rod's name on it. He slightly bent down and inserted the wooden board into the small mound. He placed his hands on his waist and said to Anne, "Okay. Rest in peace." In front of Moen and Anne, this small mound with a wooden board is the tomb that Moen and Anne made for Aluka and Rod. Aluka and Rod rest peacefully under this tree, covered in green leaves. Moen slightly bent down and bowed to them. He closed his eyes and clasped his hands together, praying that they could live the life they wanted with peace of mind in the next life. Standing next to Moen, and also slightly bent down, and silently observed a moment of silence for them. The surrounding environment is very quiet, with only the sound of the wind blowing through the leaves and grass. After finishing everything, Moen lifted his hand and gently wiped away some sweat from his forehead and face. He sighed deeply and said to Anne, "In this way, the matter can be considered officially concluded. Let's go." Moen and Anne turned around and left the big tree together. At this moment, the sunlight shone precisely on the position where they had just stood. The sunshine brought its warmth to the graves where Aluka and Rod were buried, as if trying to make their bodies no longer feel the cold. The leaves rustled softly in the gentle breeze, as if Aluka and Rod were expressing gratitude for helping Moen and Anne bury them. On the way out of the forest, Moen noticed that Anne's expression seemed a bit off. He turned his head to look at her and asked her, "What's wrong? You looked unhappy all the way. Are you still thinking about Aluka?" And walked on the road with an unhappy expression. After all, The fact that Aluka was used by the evil god left a deep impression on Anne. Aluka's deep love for Rod has made her realize what kind of love she has for Moen. She explained to Moen, "Yes, through the incident with Aluka, I am reflecting on the fact that my previous love for young master was wrong. Rationally, I know I am wrong, but deep down, I cannot suppress my feelings for you. Young master, is my love really wrong?" After speaking, Anne's cheeks were tinged with a slight blush. She lowered her head, feeling a bit embarrassed about what she had done to Moen before. Although she already knew that her way of treating Moen was wrong, she still didn't quite understand which step of her love was wrong. This is a question she has been thinking about all the way. Upon hearing Anne's question, Moen placed his hand on his chin and raised his head to ponder for a moment. Then, he expressed his thoughts on the question to Anne. "Maybe, or perhaps you have simply mistaken possessiveness for love. The possessiveness mostly comes from the extension of love, similar to love, but fundamentally completely different and easily confused." And turned his head to look at Moen and asked him, "Did young master mean that I confused possessiveness with love?" Moen narrowed his eyes slightly and tried to think about the question. However, he couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation for this problem. I'm not quite sure either. Everyone has different ideas in their hearts. Whether love or possessiveness is hidden in people's hearts. Only they know best." And still doesn't quite understand what Moen said. She silently said in her heart. However, for them, this is also the most difficult to distinguish. For her, people who are deeply in love often fail to notice how crazy her love is. It is precisely because loving someone is too complicated that she wants to know the correct way to love someone. At this moment, the sunlight shone through many big trees onto Moen. The temperature of the sunlight made him feel very comfortable. The sun was a little dazzling, so he raised his hand to gently shade his eyes and looked up at the azure sky. He smiled and couldn't help but praise. "The weather is pretty good today," and was deeply moved by Moen, who was bathed in the sunshine. Looking at Moen standing beside her, she couldn't help but think, "So, what exactly is love?" Perhaps she will need to spend more time in the future, carefully searching for the answer to this question. At this moment, Anne suddenly remembered something. She turned around to face Moen and said to him, "Young master." Moen put down his hand and looked at Anne. He asked her, "What's wrong? Do you have any other questions?" And placed her hands on her chest, and her fingers unconsciously intertwining. She lowered her head slightly, afraid to look directly into Moen's eyes, as if feeling shy about what to say next. She said to Moen, "I remember when we were in the basement. Young master once said that you could date me as a normal couple. Since you said that, can we start over?" Upon hearing what Anne said, Moen was somewhat surprised. Then, Moen lifted his left hand and pressed the index finger of his right hand against the palm of his left hand, making a stop motion. He gestured for Anne not to continue speaking for now. He closed his eyes and pondered for a moment. He asked her, "Wait a minute, just in case. I have to ask you another question. Next, are you taking me back to the Duke's?" After Moen finished speaking, and couldn't help but answer, Yes. And placed one of her hands on her chest, and lowered her head slightly. She expressed her true thoughts towards Moen with sincere emotions. I grew up in the Duke's mansion since I was young, which is also my only home. Of course, I'm not trying to become the mistress of the Duke's mansion. I will still serve young master as a personal maid, but while serving young master, can I? And didn't continue speaking. It seems difficult for her to speak the latter half of the sentence. She lifted her arm slightly to cover her face, and shifted her gaze to the nearby bushes. The blush on her cheeks grew increasingly red, like a red apple. She felt very shy about the current situation.